second semester of SWOP breakfast seminars. The theme for this semester is women in politics and in social life. And I'm delighted that we're kicking off with the presentation by Asanda Benya, who is one of our PhD fellows and who has spent more than a year working underground at implants, studying the working lives of women on the mine and around the mine. So I think that you're going to get some really very powerful and interesting insights from her. And I'm not going to say anything more, but simply to just hand over to her. So Asanda, welcome. Thanks for coming, and over to you.
Thanks, Carl. I'm actually not going to be talking about the PhD work today. So I'm not going to be talking about my PhD work today. I am going to be talking about women in Marikana. I think every time when we talk about Marikana, people always think, oh, it must only be men in Marikana. There are no women in Marikana. So I want to talk about women and say there are women in Marikana. And they are not only in Marikana, they're not just inactive in Marikana. There's a lot of things that women in Marikana are doing. And I'm going to look at two of those things. So the first one is on reproduction. But I think the point I want to make from this is that a lot of the work that women have been doing in Marikana has not been reported. The narrative about Marikana does not involve some of the things that women in Marikana have been busy with. And that's what I want to focus on. And the first one is really the invisible contribution of women when it comes to reproduction issues, the production issues, but also the supposed, well, what people say is women not active even in the strike actions. And I think what I want to argue again is that women have been active in the strike action. So those are the two things I want to focus on. So like I said, the dominant narrative about Marikana is mainly August 16, 2012. It's the strike action, it's the copy, it's the exploitation of workers, it's the low wages. And when we're talking about even the wages, people don't seem to emphasize the living wage. They seem to emphasize only the wage. Yet the workers talk about a living wage. And what I want to say today is that there's a broader story to Marikana, and the living part in the living wage is as important as the exploitation of workers. It's as important as the copy itself. I'm saying that when we look at not only the production issues in Marikana, when we look at the reproduction issues in Marikana, it gives us a much deeper, I think, understanding of what's happening in Marikana. It gives us a much more holistic reading of Marikana. And also it allows us to talk about the voices of women who've been silenced, I think, who've been predominantly silenced in the narrative about Marikana. Another benefit of looking at the reproduction or giving voice to women is that we get to talk about the living conditions and juxtapose them with the living wage that workers are talking about. But I'm not going to talk about the living conditions. I think there's been a lot of talk about the socio-economic conditions in Marikana, but I want to focus on women in Marikana as active agents in all that's been happening in Marikana since 2012. And I think part of framing my argument is really about the proximity of Marikana. I'm not sure if some of you have been to Marikana, but Marikana is very close to, so when you go to Marikana, on the one side you have the mines, right in the middle is the Gopi, and on the other side is the community, the informal settlement, and on the other side the formal settlement. So Marikana is very close to where people live. It's about basically 200 meters between the Gopi and Marikana, the settlement, and also another 200 or so meters between the Gopi and the mine itself. So there's a lot of, it's very close to them. And the closeness of this location, I argue that it's very important for understanding the role that women have been playing in Marikana. Not only is it close to the shaft, but also even the hostel itself. It's located very closely with the community. It's within the community, in fact. It's not something far. So you have workers moving freely between the settlement, between the hostel and work. So those are not the only connections, however. Even if you go to the family units inside the hostels, even if you go to the family units or the hostels around Marikana, you'll find lots of women who are not living in the hostels, who are actually living in the informal settlements, washing clothes for their boyfriends or husbands, doing cooking for them, basically reproducing the labor of these workers and only returning to the settlements in the evenings. But also, if you've been listening to the story since December 2012, Marikana has been struggling a lot with water. And part of the job that women have been doing, whether they're living in the settlements or whether they're living with their partners in the family units, it's been to get up early in the morning and go get water for them. So even struggles like water, again, they give women an extra job in a way, because when a mine worker has to be at work at say 4 in the morning, that means the partner, the woman, who is usually the partner, wakes up at 2 in the morning and they go searching for water around the formal settlement or around the informal settlement itself, and she comes back, makes sure that the water is warm before the husband wakes up and gets ready for work. So in a way, there's a lot of work that women are doing that helps to sustain not just their workers, but also helps and contributes directly to the production. But also, these are not the only connections. Like I said, that the living arrangements themselves, they make it easy for women to interact with workers. Not just interact with workers, but contribute to the reproduction of workers and the reproduction of the labor of workers. So you'll find that in some of the yards, for instance, there's 10 shacks, and each shack has both a man and a woman, and some is just men. But inside the shacks, what also goes on is like just the conversations around, they are about the mines. The conversations around the language that that women are even using is about the mines. There's no separation. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. There's no separation between what the workers are doing and between what women are doing. The victories at work is what they talk about every day, all the time. The challenges that they face at work is what they talk about. So the mines are evoked in every way in the lives of these women. But they're not just evoked, even the struggles that the working conditions themselves are they don't only affect the mine workers, they also affect the women. So if a mine worker gets home injured and has not been to the hospital, it's usually the woman who has to nurse that mine worker. So it's not only the mines for women. The point that again I want to make is that the mines for women is not something that they interface with through the check at the end of the month, or through the wage, or even during the strikes. It's something that they deal with on an everyday basis. The mines form their ways of being, their ways of doing everything. And like I said, they're not only, if someone is injured at work, they're usually taken care of at home. So they identify with the happenings of the mines much more closely than even the partners who are in the villages. And if a machine breaks down, I was very surprised at how articulate some of these women were about how the mines affect them. If a machine breaks down, for instance, the partner is going to leave home later than usual because he's not going to be rushing for the cage to go underground. But what that means for some of these women is that they have to wake up again early and cook an extra meal that they hardly cook when the partner... So every little thing that happens underground affects them at home. Also, if a working place is closed or if a copper cable is stolen, it affects not just the workers but also the women. They're kept directly and indirectly in the loop because of these because of their living arrangements. So even if the husband is not telling them what's happening at work, but during the day, when the night shift workers are sitting around, they're talking about what's happening at work. And so in a way, women are really intricately, they know the intricate details. They're intimately and immediately involved in what's happening in the mines. And it is not just that they know about what's happening in the mines, but they also know how what's happening in the mines demands extra work from them. They know how what's happening in the mines not only demands extra work from them, but how it directs their everyday activities, how it changes, and in fact how the mines order their lives. Instead of, for instance, again, with the mine operations when I was there being halted, some of the things that happened where workers again were not going underground, and women were talking about how now their partners are having to wear extra normal clothes instead of work suits to work. But that means they have extra laundry then to do, and all this other extra work that they have to do. And whenever something changes at work, it ultimately has a bearing on the home space and on women's time, and it changes their everyday routines. So even when things are not verbally communicated, the demands on their time are always there. The demands on their relationships, it changes the rhythms of their day-to-day activities. So in a way, there's this invisible labor that women are performing to sustain the mines, to sustain and reproduce the work of the mine workers. So the mines for women in Marikana are not a foreign thing. It's something that they interface with daily. In fact, it organizes their very lives and everyday existence. And every demand, when there's a demand for an extra production at work, somehow that extra production at work, it involves a demand again on women. Because if men are not going to be home for extra days because they're working overtime, women again have to put in extra hours at home. Also have to put in extra hours reproducing the work of the work of mine workers. And also women as community, women in Marikana have not, so they've not only been active in the in reproducing the work of mine workers, but also as community members. There's a lot of things that women in Marikana have been doing, building the crash, making sure that Marikana as a community, supporting basically the community itself, but none of that is captured. And the second point I want to make, I think this is I suppose the most important one for me, is the work that women have been doing around the strikes in Marikana, and how that is completely absent in the narrative about Marikana. Yes, prior to the strikes in 2012, women admitted when I was talking to them that they were not really involved. But part of the reason they were not involved directly, they were indirectly involved, but part of the reason they were not directly involved is primarily because of where the strike took place, the mountain, the Gobi, and how for them, a lot of these women who live in the informal settlement again are coming from places like the Eastern Cape, where the mountain has a certain cultural symbolism. And so for them to be in the Gobi, it meant they would be disrespectful to their ancestors or to their, as mafazi as they're called, it would be a form of disrespect. So in a way, they drew back from the Gobi, they drew back from the mountain. But also the mountain for them, it was not only a way of ukuhlonipha, your ancestors, but also the mountain for them represented two things, the kraal and the boma. And so they did not want, and a kraal is where you keep animals basically, and women are excluded from that space culturally. And again, a boma is where you have boys who are undergoing circumcision, leaving. So, excuse me. And again, women are excluded from that space because of superstitions and dangers that are supposedly that women would bring. So women were not on the copy because of these things. But that doesn't mean they were not involved in the strike. That doesn't mean they were not supporting the strike. In fact, when I went again around and I talked to a lot of women, you hear them saying, no, but we're the ones who were cooking for the men. We're the ones who sustained the strike in many ways than just cooking for the men. Some husbands were not coming back from the Gobi, and there were lots of things that are happening. And so we were supporting the wives. We were keeping the community together. So in fact, we were involved. But also after the massacre, women were involved. But again, that's been lost in the narrative. Women were involved. They're the ones who were going to the court after the 270 workers were arrested. Women are the ones who were in the courts, protesting and demanding that that their partners be released. Not only that, women, after a few weeks after the Marikana massacre, they organized a march. But that march, nothing's been said about them. They organized a march, and while they were organizing a march, some of the women were shot and one was even killed by the police. But nothing is said about that role of women within the Marikana narrative. But they were not only involved in the strike, but also in the commission itself. When you go to Marikana during the day, a lot of women are not in Marikana. They are attending the commission. And part of this, again, is to support their male counterparts. Some whose brothers have been injured, who've moved back to the Eastern Cape, cannot attend the Marikana Commission. But also, after the Marikana Commission moved from Rustenburg to Centurion, even the workers who were working night shift who could attend it when it was in Rustenburg, after it moved to Centurion, they could not attend. So who has been sent to attend? It's mainly the women who've been going to listen for family members, to listen for their boyfriends and come back and give them a feedback every evening. And this has come at a cost for some women because employers got tired of giving them days off. And so they lost employment. Others had to stop looking for employment, had to stop searching for jobs. In fact, their lives again were organized around the commission and going to listen to the commission. So again, we see how the women have been they've been involved in the commission. They've not only they've had to step in and abandon all other responsibilities and tasks in order to attend the commission. And it's come at a very high cost. Even in the 2014 strikes, women have again played a very key role. In fact, they've boosted and maintained, I think, the morale of their men. And in that way, they've enabled the strike to continue for as long as it's continued. They've played a very key role in sustaining this 5-month strike that we've just had. But not only in supporting and morale boosting for their male counterparts, but also women, because they're the ones who are involved in things like Stokvels, who are involved in these saving schemes and these community saving schemes. They're the ones who, during the strike, when men were not generating any income, they're the ones who've had to then go out and withdraw some of the Stokvel money and put food on the table for their families. And also seeking support from other external bodies out